I'm just checking with my colleague if we're live. Okay, cool. We're all good. All right. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome to this panel discussion on shifting identities, dementia, mental capacity. I'm Musa Haddad, Head of Policy and Research at Vegetarian for Life, and this is an issue very close to our hearts. We offer information and advice to older vegans and vegetarians, and we also work directly with the care sector and to influence the care sector on policy relating to the care sector. So with around about 70% of people who live in care homes having dementia, how that sector and how we as a society conceptualize and handle questions about what happens to our identity as our mental capacity changes is really fundamental to the work we do as an organization. So we're lucky today to have three panelists who have got a wide range of experience and insights on this topic. I'm not going to talk for you or spend too long introducing you, but and I've asked you to each spend about 5 to 10 minutes setting out some of your thoughts and experience. But just briefly, I'd kind of say who the panelists are. So we've got Andrea Lavazza, who is an associate professor at Pegaso University in Naples. He's a neuroethicist and a moral philosopher, and his main interests focus on the intersection of new technologies, cognitive sciences, and ethics. On those themes, he's been published widely in international scientific journals, and he's going to speak around questions relating to the philosophical issues around mental capacity. We're also joined by Jenny Henderson, who's a panel member of the Mental Health Tribunal in Scotland, which she joined following a long career in nursing and caring for people affected by dementia, as well as teaching staff. She's going to be talking to rights, decision-making, and law around mental capacity. And our third panelist is Glenda Roberts, who's Director of Older People Services for the Salvation Army. And there she oversees the provision of residential community services for older people throughout the UK. And she's master's educated at the University of Scotland. She has a specific interest in dementia studies. And she's been a qualified registered adult nurse since 2002, which gives her experience of supporting young adults with complex needs and older people in health and social care settings in both the third sector and the private sector. And she's going to talk about issues relating to practice in care settings. So overall, this panel is due to run for about an hour. So that should give us a good half hour, at least, for discussion at the end. So if anyone watching does have questions, then please pop them into the chat as they pop into your head. I've also got some that have been emailed to me in advance, so I will kind of intersperse those as well as we go. So with that short introduction, Andrea, are you happy to kick off?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to be here today. As said, I'm a philosopher and a neuroethicist, which means scholar who is familiar with theoretical matters, but also with empirical studies in the field of biomedical issues. So my brief presentation will be based on I wrote about some years Englishman named Oscar of the vegan movement. I hope you can see me. It will be what I'm going to say. Maybe
I think we may have lost Andrea. So I give him a minute to see if he returns. He just seems to be coming back in.
Sorry for that. I need to recharge my presentation, I think. Can you see it?
It's not come up yet.
No?
Nothing at the moment.
Yeah.
Musa, would it help while that's loading if I just talk a little bit from my perspective?
Yeah, that'd be great. That sounds good.
So thank you. And sorry, I'm not jumping in there. If you get the slides loaded, if you want to go, because it does sort of make sense for me to maybe come last from an operational perspective. So I just really wanted to talk into more of the practice aspects that I see on a day-to-day basis. So as Musa explained, I am a nurse and I oversee the provision of residential care, and I'm also a vegan, so I've had it from both ends about being a patient recently in an NHS hospital, but also the delivery of care in our services and how we support people who are lacking capacity for us to really hold what's dear to them when they're no longer able to hold on to it for themselves. And for me, it's about knowing the individual, it's about working with them and about working with their families and understanding what's really important to them. And sometimes the importance of the identity of that individual gets lost, not in any malicious way, but in an intention to look after people. So if you have somebody who is vegan or vegetarian and they've lost the ability to ask for that and show their preferences, if it were me, I would want that to be held on to. But sometimes care staff, with the best of intentions, if somebody is expressing that they want what somebody else is eating and that has maybe got meat in it, the care staff will adhere to that and give it to them without understanding the implications to that individual. So for me, the important thing is about holding what's dear to other people, enabling them to still be able to live their life in that way, educating our staff, because it isn't done in a different, in a way to cause harm or distress to somebody, but it might not be important to them. So how do we enable them to maintain that? And I think, Musa, some of the on the Vegetarian for Life guidance, there's some really clear guidance about how we can support people and how staff can help people by offering them different choices. If somebody is expressing that they want to eat meat and they never have done, not assuming that that's an unwise decision that they're making and supporting that under the guidance of the Mental Capacity Act, but trying to understand, have they been given the right support and the right information to make that decision? So if somebody is being presented, they're sat next to somebody who's eating meat and that's what they've seen, well, they might think that that is the only choice to make. So supporting people with the decisions and holding dear what's dear to them. So yeah, for me, it's about individualizing our care. It's about really knowing the people and involving their families and other key stakeholders in their care, educating people, and just working them in the way that Vegetarian for Life does, Musa, is educating people and working with them to understand the importance. But like I say, it's a journey for all of us. It's not a criticism. When I see it, it's upsetting, but it's actually more done from ignorance than it is through any intentional harm to an individual. Sometimes it might be about the availability. So, some of the producers that care homes work with, they might also not be providing what the care home needs. So it's really multifaceted. It's not just the care staff, it's not just the chefs in the kitchen, it's not just the care home company, it's the people who are providing that food for them as well, that we need to be educating and having those discussions with. So yeah, from an operational perspective, that's my my sort of input.
Thank you very much. Really interesting. And I think, as you've alluded to, it does chime with a lot of how we try and work, trying to see the best in people and not, talk positively rather than berating people. Also, those practical challenges you mentioned, suppliers, but also maybe levels of skill and knowledge in catering, all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So thank you. It's really helpful. So Andrea, I do have your slides, hopefully, to add to a few. If you would like me to move to the next slide, maybe just tell me and I will try and do that for you. I think you're up to this slide, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure if you're on mute. I'm not hearing you. Oh.
I think he's still on mute. The mute button.
Yeah, I think it's on mute.
I'm sorry.
Are you able to?
I was mute.
Great.
Oh, sorry. Now, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So very briefly, I know I have not much time. So I was saying that this is a real case. I wrote about it in a scientific paper some years ago, and it's a very interesting case. Maybe some of you can be familiar with it, but very briefly, this is about a Swedish man who had the misfortune of getting Alzheimer's disease, and then once admitted in a facility, he was mistakenly given a portion of meatballs, and it happened that he liked it very much. And then from that moment, Oscar refused to eat vegetables. And this was a problem, as you obviously can understand, for the staff, divided between the desire to please the patient and the demands of his wife, according to whom the husband wanted to eat vegan and was distorted by his disease. And so this example, very rare case, but a real case, can help us evaluate a series of ethical issues related to the autonomy of the patient and treatment of people strongly impaired in their intellectual abilities. So this is an ideal scenario in which we can try to address some of these specific issues. And obviously, we can rely on different theoretical principles and also on some empirical facts. For example, that Alzheimer's disease is not a condition which is stable, but we know that there is an evolution of the disease. So in the first stages, probably the patient can retain some capabilities in order to choose what they may want to eat, for example. But obviously, we need to consider case by case. And I'd like very briefly to show you something more related to a perspective from a well-known philosopher with Derek Parfit, who passed away some years ago. He didn't write directly about veganism and dementia, but his thought is very helpful in order to consider what we can think about this kind of scenario. I'm sorry, I cannot make the slides go ahead, but I will talk without them.
If you just tell me which slide you want to be on, I'm able to move them for you.
The ones titled Nuanced View. Okay, thank you very much. Considering Parfit's thoughts on that topic, we can think that probably perspective on that is that the patient can be deemed as a different individual from the past person he used to be because of the disease. But this is just one perspective on that, because we do not have strong reasons to prioritize the current self over the former self. So we need to consider, from a philosophical point of view, these two potential selves we can consider in this scenario. And based on Parfit's take on the topic, we also need to take into consideration the objective value of the choice of the patient before it was affected by the disease. And if you can go to the next slide. The next one, please.
Next one,
Okay. We need to consider different aspects based on Parfit take. Obviously, we need to take into consideration the patient quality of life, if it is improved by meeting their current desires. But in this case, we need to resort to utilitarian consideration. But I think that we can also take into consideration the previous commitment by the patient. And if you can go ahead, please, to the last one. My tentative conclusion is that we need to consider a fact, an empirical fact, which is that patients with neurodegenerative condition may experience cravings for protein-rich or iron-containing foods, such as meat, because they have changes in their brain. So this is an empirical fact. And additionally, they may lose the ability to emotionally connect with the suffering of animals, which can make it harder for them to maintain their vegan commitments. But we might argue that this is not merely a state they find themselves in, but a condition they would likely reject if they were fully aware of it. So my take on this scenario is that this is a disease, it's not something people have chosen to endorse. So this change does not reflect a personality shift or a transformation of self that they could consciously endorse, as said. As in this context, an advanced directive specifying the wish to always be served vegan meals, for example, represents, in my opinion, a fully rational and ethical choice. And in the absence of such a directive, caregivers and decision makers as well should give serious consideration to the patient's past moral commitments. So this is a perspective which is not commonly shared, as you know, but I think it is something we need to consider seriously. Obviously, in general, case-by-case decision may be more appropriate than rigid adherence to a fixed evaluation, but in general, I think that past commitments to veganism is something which be considered and should be considered very seriously as a moral commitment which cannot be overcome by the disease as such. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. Really kind of interesting in my head to play around with some of the complexities that you're describing, and hopefully we can sort of expand on some of that as we go into the discussion a little bit. So Jenny, am I able to ask you to speak, please?
Yeah. Yes, certainly. As I think you said in the beginning, my background is mainly in nursing. I have done a lot of work around capacity, both within the university where I helped design a module on assessing capacity, but also in my day-to-day work as a tribunal member. I find nearly every tribunal capacity comes up as an issue. So you asked me just to talk a little bit about human rights. Well, I'm not going to very much. They're very complex, but I just want to remind you what Eleanor Roosevelt said to the, I think she said it to the UN. She said, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In the small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on the maps of the world." And is not this veganism, is that not one of the small things that's very close to people's hearts and doesn't make it to the maps of the world? And it's easy to override people's small human rights. So I want to go on to talk a bit about mental capacity and how that impacts on the way we treat people and what we do with people, and how all the acts, and in England and in Scotland, the acts are all underpinned by the Human Rights Act of the European Convention. So whichever act you look at, there are subtle differences, but they all actually are saying the same things. Now, I think one of the things that tends to happen, I don't know if Glenda would agree, people tend to get a diagnosis or a identification that they lack capacity, and it's taken to be a global thing, and they lack capacity. They're incapax, they don't understand, they can't make any decisions. And all the acts say that it's decision specific. And you may not be able to run the Bank of England, but you can choose what you want to eat, or you can choose what you want to wear. And the subtle differences between that are really, really important. When we look at capacity, there's sort of like, I often talk about it in taking a slight loan. It's 80 shades of grey, because each little decision should be individually assessed as to whether they have capacity to make it. Now, interestingly, we can all make unwise decisions, and we often do. But people who have been deemed to lack capacity it's very hard for them to make unwise decisions. Other people make decisions for you, and it's easy for that to happen. And I think we should be coming from a point of view where we must assume that people can make decisions and they do have some understanding, but it's how that's presented to them. And it may be that if we look at the Mental Health Act in England actually sets out what an assessment looks like. And an assessment looks like that you may fluctuate, you may not be able to make an independent decision, a specific decision. You have to be have some mental impairment. But how you assess it is by knowing that the person can hold on to what they believe. They can have an understanding of what's being told to them or what information they're meant to be taking on board. They can retain it, and they can tell you later that that's the decision they've made. Now, I've got a friend at the moment who's in hospital with dementia, and she's recently had a bereavement, recently had a diagnosis of dementia, and she hates it in hospital. She wants to go home. She couldn't manage at home. She completely was unable to cope with anything that went wrong at home. She's determined to go home. She doesn't want to go into a home, and she doesn't want anyone to live with her. Now, she clearly is unable to make that decision about where she wants to be and what she wants to do. She can't follow through. She can't actually process what's being said. Now, we often talk about insight, and it's quite big in Scotland, the use of insight, and it's very much central to the Mental Health Act in Scotland. But actually, insight has come under a lot of criticism. It was often used to describe in psychosis someone had severely impaired insight or partially impaired insight, and it actually still forms part of the way you assess somebody's capacity in Scotland in terms of their ability to understand mental health treatment. What the word that people are trying to use is appreciation now rather than insight, and that's quite interesting, I think, because it's moving away from this kind of psychiatrist autocratic way of describing it. So this friend of mine doesn't have that insight, if you'd like to say it like that, or appreciation of what's going to happen if she tries to go home or if she goes into a care home, etc. So what should be happening with that situation? She should be having supportive decision making, people around her helping her to make that decision, because she partially understands it. She doesn't like where she is, but she doesn't know where she wants to be. She partially understands the concept that she needs to be somewhere else, but can't understand why. If we look at her past wishes, very important, and exactly the same if you're vegetarian. Her wishes are to be at home. That's where her heart is. Her heart is in her home. Always wanted to be there. But if you look at what's possible and what is what in England is called your best interest, but what in Scotland is called to be of benefit, and I actually think benefit's a much better word, because best interest could be in my best interest. I don't particularly want her home again because she's going to be phoning me 10 times a day. But what's a benefit to her is to be at home. So you can translate whatever the issue is into any decision, and it all becomes quite difficult. So in England, the test is actually written down. It's not in Scotland. So anybody can come up with a way to test someone in Scotland, but in England, it's much more structured. And one of the things that I talked about it, capacity fluctuating. Very often people will go ask in a noisy environment, or they don't give people the right equipment to actually understand. It may well be that they need pictures, or they may need some other way of explaining it than what's being given. And I think what we need to do is be much more nuanced in how we actually decide whether people can make a decision. I think your example of the meatballs is very interesting. And from a philosophical point of view, I can see where your argument was going. I simply would produce some meatballs that looked exactly the same. But that's that would be my simple way of making the wife happy and giving the gentleman what his past wishes were, which were important. So if anybody's got any questions on more about assessing capacity or want to discuss it further, I'm happy to consider it. Thank you.
Thank you. Another, you used the word nuance yourself, and yeah, just so it's kind of, like I sort of enjoyed the subtleties that you were drawing out a little bit there as you were talking. Although I think we're now going to have the cat among the pigeons when some of the questions are really about specifically what do you do about this. So I'm just going to leap straight into the first one, which is asks, what would the panel suggest in this situation? A person in a care home living with dementia is a vegetarian, but is asking to have meat. They're distressed by not having meat. The family do not want the person to be given meat. How should the care home deal with this? No formal statement was made prior to the onset of dementia.
I'm happy to jump in from my perspective, because it is a situation that we see, and obviously the person who we're talking about, the resident who's living in the care home, should be central to that. But we're also got the voice of the family that we need to consider. So it goes back, I think, Jenny, you were saying about, the circumstances in which we're working with somebody. So if we are, if we're presenting to this person a lack of choice for them, it could be something as simple as showing them alternatives. Why is it that person is asking for meat? Is it because that's all that's available, that's all that they've seen? Is it that the vegetarian options are not as appetizing, or they're not as varied? So I think you really need to dig underneath, why is that person asking for meat? If we know that isn't something that they would have been acceptable to them before they went into the care home and potentially have lost capacity. And Jenny's point about this fluctuating capacity, is it that we're just not providing the right environment, the right cues and communication for that individual, and trying to listen to their family? Because I think very often within a care home setting, that family members who know that individual best can be cut out a little bit, pushed away a little bit. So I would be exploring everything that I could as to why we've got to this point with this person and why they're asking for it. If it is distressing them, then obviously I understand why the caregivers have maybe got to the point of thinking, give them what they want, because actually we don't want to see them distressed. But actually, why are they becoming distressed at this point?
I agree entirely, Glenda. I remember another situation where I was talking to some care homes. I was doing some teaching on incapacity, and it was a group of care home staff, and they said, but we're taught to give people choice, and they're choosing to have, in this case, it was sausages. And maybe it is because you're quite right that the vegetarian menus are just not very exciting in some care homes. I mean, it depends very much on the chef and the knowledge and that sort of thing. But I think, are we giving them choice, or are we just getting caught up in giving choice for choice's sake when you're not actually digging a bit deeper, as you're saying?
Yeah.
Did you want to add anything, Andrea, to that?
Well, I forgot to say before that the Swedish Ethics Committee decided that meatballs should be served to Oscar because they thought that it was his best interest, as Jenny hinted at before. So their interpretation of the situation was exactly that. The best interest seen from the ethics committee, obviously, was that meatball should be served to Oscar. So I think
sorry, I'm
please,
a bit
please.
with Jenny on this because I would be, Jenny, your suggestion was to find an alternative. So I'm with you on that, and I think, you know, the idea of best interests. Why would it be in the best interest of an individual to give them something that nutritionally there's no advantage to? So I think very often we fall back on the health of an individual. So there is no reason why a vegetarian or vegan diet can't be adequate for that individual's needs. So then we're looking at the identity of that person. So whilst I respect the decision by the ethics committee, I think I would challenge that under the guise of best interest for that individual.
Yeah, in Scots you wouldn't get anywhere with that in Scots law. Is it a benefit? Is it a benefit to him? And it could be a benefit if he was nutritionally living on lettuce, unless he had his meatballs. It could be nutritionally beneficial.
Yeah.
So we have another question that kind of maybe, I don't know if there's anything to add to it, but it seems to sort of be quite linked to what you're saying, which is that if a person living with dementia, previously vegan, but refuses to eat vegan options, and there, as a result of that, they're experiencing weight loss, should they then be given meat?
Can I go? Yeah. I think if they're perhaps muddling up here, well, not muddling up, it's difficult to separate out. As dementia advances, you often have problems with eating and drinking, and you also lose a number of taste buds. So things don't taste the same. You retain sweet taste buds and lose a lot of the savoury ones. So it may not be that the vegan food is the root of the problem, but the fact that the person is having difficulties with food generally. And it may be going down a rabbit hole, suggesting that you need to change the diet to get the calories in. I'm sure you can still get the calories in a way that supports the vegan principles of that person without resorting to a meat-based diet. And it's more about they need very close assessment on how well they can eat and drink, full stop. I don't know if Glenda's got anything to add, or Andrea.
I think, Jenny, I agree. It's about working with your dietitians, working with your speech and language therapists to try and understand whether there is another reason behind it. You know, we can look at 40, because any of us as we're aging, we're at risk of malnutrition irrespective of the diet that we are we're eating. So there are fortifications that you can be added to the diet that can still adhere to a vegan or a vegetarian diet. So I would be working with other disciplines to see, exactly as you say, Jenny, are there other reasons behind that? And yeah, can we find another way of fortifying the diet for that individual to help them to maintain their weight?
Did you want to add anything, Andrea?
Well, going back very briefly to the decision of the ethics committee, I suspect, it's just my view, obviously, that the final decision was based mostly on a ideological stance on the situation, because I think they thought they needed to respect the autonomy of the patient over a potential paternalistic perspective. If you, in a way, accept the wife's suggestion, or you resort to past commitments of the patient, you can be charged, so to say, with a paternalistic attitude toward the patient, or in general in the bioethical issues. So this is just a suspect. I'm not sure, obviously, but I think sometimes, at least, people tend to avoid this risk, and so decisions can be biased in that manner. So this is my personal view. Obviously, I do not want to make misinterpretation, but I think we need to avoid this different risk, just not just only avoiding paternalism, but we need also to avoid the opposite. So this is my view.
Can I just ask a question? Can I ask a question? Yeah. Andrea, would it be normal for this sort of issue to go to an ethics committee? Because I'm pretty sure in the UK it would never happen.
Well, I think it depends on the national guidelines. For example, in Italy, I know obviously the Italian situation. I think that in cases like that, staff can try to have a decision from the local ethics committee. In Italy, we have local ethics committees in different hospitals or facilities. So we do not to ask for the national bioethics committee, but we can have this decision from a local ethics committee. I do not know about other countries, but I think different countries can have different guidelines or rules concerning this kind of decisions.
Just gonna show a comment that popped up. from one of my colleagues, just to say that we do have a food fortification guide that talks about how vegan alternatives can be used to add calories and protein. And it's quite common in the care sector for dairy to be used to fortify. So obviously for vegetarians, that's fine, but not for vegans. So I have another question which asks whether ignoring a person's long-standing dietary preference could be considered a form of neglect or discrimination. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I don't think it would be done deliberately.
But I suppose, Jenny, we don't have to have intention to neglect somebody, do we?
No.
And I suppose it's about the harm, isn't it? If by neglecting somebody's choices, and I'm not necessarily thinking about physical harm, I'm thinking about psychological harm to that individual. You know, is there a potential that we're harming somebody really, Musa, is what we're asking, aren't we? I think that's, you know, I suppose it's where your value base comes from, isn't it, as to how you would view that. So for me as a vegan, I would say definitely, I feel that if I was not being given a vegan diet as I've previously followed, I would feel that you're harming me because you're harming me psychologically. But that's quite personal, because that's my value set. My value set is from a vegan perspective, isn't it?
Yeah. But if you, I've done a lot of work with a group called Faith in Older People. And one of the things that is very hotly debated is the fact that people have difficulty expressing their faith as their dementia advances. And is there any point in giving anybody communion? It's slightly off topic, but similar. And I would say always yes, you should give people communion because it's what they were used to and what they had. But do they understand what it is anymore? And the answer is probably no. So they probably have lost their faith, but retain the elements of faith that are related to rituals and frequent things that happened. And I suppose that's just the same with the vegan diet. But would I say we were neglecting them if they didn't have those spiritual needs met? And I would say yes. But I wouldn't say it was necessarily harmful.
And I think it goes back to allowing people to hold on, us helping people to hold on.
Yeah.
To what they're maybe losing through a change in their capacity.
Yeah. Do you have to understand to want to carry on with what you've always done? And I think there is a nuanced thing around that people do like the familiar.
There's a rhythm, isn't there? And actually we know that for individuals living with dementia, that familiarity and that rhythm can be very comforting and very helpful.
So I guess the same sort of food that you've always been used to would offer the same sort of reassurances. Don't know. But I don't, as harmful, I think harmful is a bit strong.
Did you have any thoughts, Andrea, on this one?
Yeah. I think it's a difficult matter, obviously. I think in general, my take is that if there are not strong reasons to change past habits of the patient, we need to
Support.
continue the past diet or food habits of the patient. Obviously, in cases like Oscar's, we have a complication because it seems that the individual changes his mind and now is not committed anymore to a vegan habit, for example. But in general, I think we should keep the past habits of the individual. It is a way to respect their commitments and their deepest choices. I think if the disease causes some changes, these changes are less relevant than the previous choices in general, obviously. But again, I think we need to have these general principles and then try to see case by case where the best solution can lie.
So we've got about 8 or so minutes left. So I thought it'd be good if we could, I'd go around the three of you and ask you if you've got any kind of thoughts that tie together what we've kind of been talking about today. But maybe I could tie it in with one question that is outstanding, which is what steps can care settings take to better care for vegetarians and vegans? So kind of like maybe thinking about what we've talked about, but also the sort of positive application maybe of some of these principles as well. And I don't mind who if anyone has a burning desire to go first, otherwise I'm happy to dictate the order. Okay, well, I'll start with, as you're at the top of my screen, I saw Glenda.
For me, we've already talked about, care settings from an education perspective. We've seen a growth in vegans and vegetarian people in our care homes. We've seen a growth in that over recent years. And so we shouldn't be settling for the old stereotype of food. We've got so much variety that is available for people. So I think there's a lot about education. For me, food in care homes is a real rhythm of life. Food is, it's community, it's conversation, it gives a rhythm to the day because we have our meals. It's a real focus. So, if we concentrate, some settings will have protected meal times. We look at the ambience. We should be looking about the provision of specialist diets. We look at texture modified diets. So why are we not looking in the same focus for people to have their choices? It's about respecting the individuals. So for me, it's about education, opening up our minds to what is available and listening to people who are experiencing the meal times. Not taking it as a complaint, but working with open minds and listening to each other is what I think would really help move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I pass on to Jenny?
Yeah, I suppose I would like to see, I agree with everything Glenda's said, and if I'd been going first, I'd have probably said it, but I think I would like to see a better understanding of capacity and incapacity, and how we can actually support people to have as much capacity as possible, and not just disregard what capacity they have remaining. I'd like to see people being able to have the choice that Glenda's talking about, but that goes for so many aspects of care, and giving people choice and listening to what the families say is a key thing, and we shouldn't push families out. And I'm not sure if protected meals haven't had their day. I think we should allow relatives to come in, bring in takeaways if they want to, bring in food, make food a bigger sharing thing together, and you perhaps eliminate some of these obviously quite tense discussions that go on around it. I think it's an important part of life, and you know, Eleanor Roosevelt had it. Human rights are in the small places.
Okay, thank you. And Andrea? You're on mute again. You're on mute again.
I'm very sorry. I agree with my colleagues, and I subscribe to what they have just said. As a philosopher, I'd like to add that paradoxically, I think we need to resort more to the empirical evidence and in specific situations, and probably in the near future we can have better instrumental exams, for example, in order to understand how people are competent in making specific choices. This can be a way in which we can have good decisions without ideological distortions or something like that. Obviously, I do not think that instrumental exams or diagnosis can be always the only way to evaluate capabilities of a patient, but they can be a good contribution to more comprehensive understanding of the general condition of an individual. So I hope we can have this more shared framework within which we can try to adjudicate some difficult situations. Hopefully, it is something we are going to have in some years.
Thank you. So I'm not going to try and summarize everything I've heard, but just a few things that kind of stuck out for me. I've mentioned nuance as well, a few times, but how some of these things aren't super straightforward. The importance of education and kind of not assuming the worst of care providers. Something also important about autonomy and respect of the people that we're talking about, and protecting that, nurturing that as best we can. Something really important there about food being more than just like calories and nutrients, and the communal aspect of it, how maybe once you are kind of coming towards the last phase of your life, it's something that you can still potentially enjoy and has meaning. It carries kind of ritual and meaning and a lot more than just the chemical composition of it. But a nod also to kind of empiricism and the need for thinking about some practical concerns. And finally, I'll just share with you this little comment that says that we do have some relevant resources at VFL, and I think in particular, I think there was a kind of mention or an allusion to the idea of advanced planning. So we have a self-advocacy pack which helps individuals such as ourselves before we get to a point potentially of declining mental capacity or fluctuating mental capacity, that we can actually put our wishes very legally and very clearly in order and ahead of time. And there's also a link there to the memory care pledge that we ask care homes to sign up to say that they'll do certain things to push forward some of the better practice that we've kind of talked about. So I just want to say thank you to the three of you for joining. It's been really stimulating. This will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel for posterity. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.